So imagine you are a commander, right? It's the 7th century.
Okay, painting the picture here.
Yeah, exactly. And you are staring down this heavily armored imperial army that is, well, it's at least 3 times your size.
Which is basically a death sentence in a conventional fight.
Right. You know, a frontal assault is just, I mean, it's mass suicide. So you open your tactical manual, the text that's supposed to, guide your survival, and the primary instruction you read is literally strike the necks.
Which sounds completely terrifying.
Right. For centuries, the entire world looked at that exact phrase and just concluded, well, it's a barbaric command for literal decapitation.
Just like a primitive call for bloodshed.
Exactly. But what if it wasn't? What if instead of this primitive command, that phrase was actually a blueprint for a highly advanced asymmetric military doctrine?
Like an ancient cyber attack.
Yes. The ancient equivalent of a coordinated cyber attack aimed at completely dismantling the enemy's command and control infrastructure.
I mean, it completely shatters our inherited assumptions about these texts.
It really does. And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We are exploring a fascinating source document titled The Divine Monitor, Strategic Insights into Quranic Control and Liberation.
It's such an incredible piece of research.
It is. And the absolute engine behind this document, the researcher who is forcing this massive paradigm shift we're going to talk about, is Dr. Khaled Waleed.
His work is just phenomenal.
So we're going to follow Dr. Waleed's thread today. He takes this one specific Arabic root word, the letters RQB, or rakafba, and he radically redefines it.
Radically is almost an understatement.
Right. He argues that this root, which is heavily featured in the Quran, has been disastrously misunderstood as like a basic anatomical reference.
So it's a physical body part.
Yeah, just flesh and bone. But Dr. Waleed posits that it's actually this complex linguistic matrix, one that represents control centers, situational awareness, and systems of surveillance.
You know, to really appreciate what Dr. Khaled Waleed is doing here, we have to treat this almost as an exercise in, like, linguistic archaeology.
Oh, I like that term, linguistic archaeology.
Right, because Arabic is built on this triliteral root system, meaning almost every single word is derived from a 3-letter foundation.
Okay.
And if you misunderstand the physics of that foundation, if you get the bedrock wrong, every structure you build on top of it is going to lean.
Like building a house on sand.
Exactly. So Dr. Waleed is essentially stripping away centuries of medieval commentary. Commentary that, honestly, often projected the brutal imperial norms of its own time backward onto the ancient text.
Which makes sense. You read it through the lens of your own era.
Exactly. So he goes back to the absolute bedrock of this RQB root to see how it functioned in its original pristine environment. You know, before semantic narrowing basically reduced it to just meaning a physical neck.
Okay, but let's unpack this right out of the gate, because I know anyone listening who has, say, a background in linguistics or theology is probably thinking the exact same thing I am.
Which is?
How do centuries of native Arabic-speaking scholars get this so wrong?
It's a very fair question.
Right. I mean, is Dr. Waleed just taking modern military theory like concepts like command and control or C4ISR and projecting them backward to make this ancient text look remarkably progressive? Because I have to admit, it sounds incredibly convenient.
No, I totally get that. That is the necessary skepticism we really have to apply here. But Dr. Waleed's methodology actually defends against that accusation beautifully.
How so?
By relying on structural morphology rather than anachronism. He doesn't start with modern military theory at all. He starts with the ancient dictionaries. He starts with the pre-Islamic poetic usage of the root.
So he goes back to the absolute source material.
Exactly. And in its oldest form, RQB did not mean the physical neck connecting the head to the torso.
It didn't.
No. It meant monitoring from a high place. It implied the act of a watchman on a tower.
Yeah.
You know, cautious waiting, guarding, maintaining oversight.
Okay, wait. So the original concept is purely spatial, like it's informational, it's about having a vantage point.
Exactly that. The noun rakaba, which later became universally translated as just neck, originally denoted the critical point of vulnerability, or the center of oversight in any given system.
Wow. Okay, but then why did it eventually become associated with the physical neck?
Well, think about biology. Biologically, the neck is the ultimate point of vulnerability and control for any animal, or a human for that matter.
Oh, right. Because of the airway and the spine.
Yes. If a predator grabs the neck, it controls the breathing, the mobility, literally the life of the prey. It is the biological control center.
Okay, that actually makes perfect sense.
Right. So what Dr. Waleed argues is that later empires and commentators who were completely disconnected from the nuanced structural logic of the early language, they just flattened the meaning.
They simplified it.
They took a word that meant a node of control or a vulnerability, and they narrowed it permanently to just mean a physical neck.
Oh, wow. It's a difference between saying someone, like, cut the head off the organization and someone literally pulling out a guillotine.
That is a perfect analogy, yes.
If you lose that metaphorical and structural layer, you're left with a horror movie instead of a political analysis.
Exactly. So if we apply Dr. Waleed's framework, when the text mentions someone holding your neck, we aren't talking about a chokehold. We are talking about someone controlling your access to resources.
Or your political agency.
Yes, or your economic survival. It moves the concept of vulnerability entirely out of the realm of physical violence and into the realm of systemic architectural control.
I mean, that is huge.
It is. Dr. Waleed scales this ancient concept up to human, social, and strategic levels. Like, if a central bank or an authoritarian government controls your finances, they have their hands firmly on your economic raqaba.
You're paralyzed. You can't maneuver at all.
Exactly.
Let's actually apply this to a specific text because the source document provides this brilliant rereading of a very familiar narrative.
Oh, well, the Moses narrative.
Yes. We're looking at Al-Qasas, verse 21, which deals with Moses. And, let's skip the basic Sunday school summary. We know who Moses is.
Right, the fugitive.
Exactly. He's a fugitive in a highly hostile absolute monarchy. He has just committed manslaughter, and the entire state apparatus of Pharaoh is hunting him down.
And the traditional translations of this specific moment usually render Moses' state as leaving the city in fear, looking around.
Right. So the image we get is of a man in an emotional panic.
Yeah, we picture him sweating, terrified, haphazardly glancing over his shoulder.
Expecting an arrow in his back at any second.
Exactly. It paints him as this victim just totally consumed by terror.
But Dr. Waleed looks at the exact verb used in the text, which is yatarakab, which is derived from that RQB root, right? And he completely upends that psychological profile.
Because yatarakab is a very specific morphological form. It's a reflexive, continuous action.
Okay, break that down for us.
So Dr. Waleed points out that if the text simply wanted to say Moses was afraid, well, there are plenty of basic Arabic words for fear. But yatarakab implies a deliberate, active, hyper-focused state of situational awareness.
He is continuously monitoring the environment. I love the mechanics of this so much. In modern tactical training, they teach something called the OD loop. Have you heard of this?
I have, yeah, but explain it for the listener.
Okay, so it stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. It's how fighter pilots and tactical teams process information. And the rule is, if you are panicking, your ODA loop is broken.
Right, you're not processing data.
Exactly, you're just acting without observing. But Moses, according to Dr. Waleed's reading of Yatrakab, is running a flawless OD loop.
He really is.
He is in a panopticon. Pharaoh possesses massive state immunity and absolute control over the land. Pharaoh basically holds the Raqaba, the control center of the entire region's surveillance system.
And Moses knows this. He totally understands the architecture of Pharaoh's power.
Right.
He knows he is operating within a hostile matrix. His Yatakov is the cognitive response to being the weaker party in a deeply asymmetrical power dynamic.
He's not just running blindly.
No, he is actively reading the data of his environment. He's calculating patrol routes, looking for blind spots in the state's oversight, and carefully anticipating the enemy's next move.
It fundamentally changes the characterization of a prophet.
It really does.
He's not this helpless, hyperventilating victim. He is executing a highly sophisticated evasion maneuver.
Yeah, it is the tactical caution of a man who knows that one wrong step triggers the entire defense apparatus of an empire.
Wow. And this actually brings us to one of the most socially profound applications of Dr. Khaled Waleed's work regarding this root word.
The concept of faku rakaba.
Yes, which appears in several places, including Al-Balad, verse 14, faku rakaba, freeing a neck.
Right. And historically, exegetes interpreted this almost exclusively as the abolition of chattel slavery, like paying the price to free a captive.
Which obviously is an incredibly noble and necessary act in a 7th century context.
Oh, absolutely.
But if we accept Dr. Waleed's premise that the neck is the center of control and vulnerability, then limiting this command to just historical slavery feels incredibly, myopic.
It does. It puts an expiration date on the text.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Once chattel slavery is globally outlawed, does this command just become historical trivia? Like, cross that off the list, we're done here.
And that is precisely the trap of literalism that Dr. Waleed is dismantling.
Right.
According to his framework, Faku Rakaba is the dismantling of any system that humiliates a human being through absolute material need or systemic restriction.
Any system.
Right. The neck is bound whenever a person's agency is stripped away by an external force of control.
So we really have to look at the mechanics of modern bondage here, because the source document specifically mentions individuals crushed by unpayable debt.
Yes. Medical debt, student loans, predatory lending.
Exactly. If you are trapped in a cycle of debt where every hour of your labor is just siphoned off to service some arbitrary interest rate, your economic neck is firmly in the grip of a financial institution.
You have absolutely no agency.
You cannot make choices about your future. You can't take risks. You are bound.
And Dr. Waleed turns freeing a neck into a universal, timeless mandate for systemic liberation.
It's so powerful.
It applies equally to a 7th century captive and a 21st century citizen living under, say, an oppressive government that controls access to healthcare or education or basic mobility.
Right. When you free someone from that humiliating grip, when you strike at the node of control that binds them, you are returning their human dignity.
You are removing the external hand from their rock.
It's a living, breathing blueprint for social justice, one that adapts to whatever form oppression takes in any given era. But, oppression doesn't exist in a vacuum.
No, it certainly doesn't.
Oppression requires infrastructure, which brings us to the dark side of this root word.
Yes.
Because if Moses is using Yatarakab defensively, for situational awareness, how does the RQB root function when it's weaponized by the oppressor?
Well, Dr. Waleed explores this through verses like at Tawbah 10 and Taha 94. And here we encounter the verb turakib, which denotes a mutual or directed action. The text describes corrupt, dominant groups who monitor peaceful populations.
But this isn't just passive observation, right?
Not at all. This is malicious, offensive surveillance.
Like the 7th century articulation of surveillance capitalism, or the modern panopticon state.
That's a great way to put it.
It's the mechanism of gathering data specifically to identify points of weakness. And the source document highlights a truly terrifying psychological reality about these oppressive groups.
The phrase that they do not wait for wisdom.
Yes. That phrase is chilling.
It is crucial. When a benevolent force observes, it does so to understand, to govern justly, or to protect.
Right.
But when a malicious entity holds the power of surveillance, when they control the rakaba of a society's information, they act purely on dominance.
They don't care about wisdom or nuance.
Exactly. They gather intelligence solely to find the optimal moment to exploit and enslave. They ignore covenants, they ignore treaties, because their oversight provides them with such an overwhelming asymmetrical advantage that they feel no need to negotiate.
You are entirely at their mercy. If they control the data, they control your vulnerability.
Completely.
But, and this is where it gets really mind-bending, Dr. Khaled Waleed doesn't stop at human sociology.
No, he scales it all the way up.
Right. He takes this concept of the RQB matrix, this whole architecture of monitoring and control, and he applies it to a cosmic level.
We move from the terrestrial panopticon to divine administration.
Okay, explain this part, because the text goes into the angelic realm here.
Right. So Dr. Waleed examines the concept of the Raqib Atid mentioned in Qaf verse 18. Now, traditionally, this is often depicted as a somewhat bureaucratic angel.
Yeah, like a celestial accountant sitting on your shoulder with a ledger.
Exactly, just writing down your good and bad deeds.
It's a very reductive image.
Highly reductive. Dr. Waleed elevates this entirely. He argues that this refers to a highly structured, precise management system.
Okay.
The angelic realm is an informational processing network. They are actively monitoring, managing, and distributing the commands of the universe.
So it is a flawless system of cosmic C4ISR.
Command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Yes.
Wow. So there is this grand hierarchy of oversight.
There is.
The oppressor uses surveillance to dominate the vulnerable. The vulnerable, like Moses, use situational awareness to evade the oppressor.
Right.
And the angelic forces monitor the entire human theater. But logically, if this is a vast interconnected matrix of control, the structural logic demands a zenith.
Atop of the pyramid.
Exactly. Who sits at the absolute center? Who is the watcher that no one else watches?
And this is where Dr. Waleed reaches the theological summit of his linguistic thread. Using verses like HUD 93 and Al-Ma'idah 117, he identifies God as the supreme monitor. Al-Rakib Allah.
The supreme monitor.
God is the entity that ultimately holds the Raqaba of all creation.
The ultimate control center.
The absolute uncontested node of power over life, death, and existence. The angels may manage the distribution of commands, and tyrants might temporarily control the economic or political necks of a society, but God is the monitor over the angels, the tyrants, and the vulnerable alike.
Okay, and this brings us to a philosophical conclusion that Dr. Waleed argues is, well, it's entirely logically derived from this linguistic matrix.
Right.
The source document states that understanding God as the supreme monitor leads perfectly into the foundational Quranic declaration. You alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help. Iyaka nabudu wa iyaka nasta'in.
Yes.
So break down the mechanics of how we get from A to B here. How does supreme monitor lead to you alone we ask for help?
It is an argument of pure strategic logic.
Strategic logic.
Okay. If you fully comprehend the RQB matrix, if you understand that every single layer of power, from the predatory financial institution to the totalitarian dictator, is itself being monitored and ultimately controlled by the supreme monitor,
Right.
then placing your ultimate reliance on anything other than the supreme monitor is not just a spiritual failing, it is a massive tactical error.
Oh, wow. It's like begging a pawn for mercy while the grandmaster has already decided the outcome of the game.
Exactly. Why would you negotiate with a middle manager of oppression when you have direct access to the CEO?
That is such a powerful way to frame it.
Dr. Waleed is revealing a theology of ultimate psychological liberation here. If you truly internalize that the supreme monitor holds the ultimate neck of the tyrant who is holding your neck, your paradigm of fear completely collapses.
Because the oppressor's power is revealed as temporary.
Temporary, contingent, and entirely illusory.
It dismantles the entire architecture of human authoritarianism.
It really does.
I mean, you cannot be truly terrified of the panopticon if you know who built the walls and who holds the master key.
Beautifully said.
It's this profound synthesis of linguistics, strategy, and theology. But, and here's where things get really intense. As illuminating as that all is, we have to tackle the elephant in the room.
We do. We have to pivot to the battlefield.
We have to, because this is arguably the most radical and maybe the most necessary intervention in Dr. Khaled Waleed's work.
The recontextualization of the verses dealing with warfare.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, let me just set the boundaries for this discussion for anyone listening. We are not theologians.
No, we aren't.
And we are not here to endorse one historical sect or ideological reading over another. If there's politically charged stuff here, we're totally neutral. We are simply analyzing Dr. Waleed's specific linguistic and structural methodology based on the source text.
Right.
But his methodology directly confronts centuries of violent literalist interpretation.
It does. Because Dr. Waleed argues that commentators throughout history have constantly read these battle verses through the lens of their own eras.
Right.
Think about it. If you are an imperial scholar living in an age where warfare consists of infantry lines just hacking at each other with broadswords, and you read a word you firmly believe means neck, you are naturally going to interpret the text as a divine mandate for butchery and decapitation.
Because that's all you know. You project your own technological and tactical limitations right onto the ancient tech.
Precisely. And Dr. Waleed argues that this literalist reading completely ignores the highly sophisticated matrix of control we've just spent the last half hour unpacking.
Right. If RQB and its derivatives are about nodes of control, situational awareness, and surveillance infrastructure, then reading these verses as instructions for primitive physical mutilation is, well, Dr. Waleed implies it's not just violent, it is intellectually lazy.
And strategically absurd.
Strategically absurd, yes. Let's look at the actual historical mechanics of the battles these texts were addressing, like Badr or Uqud.
Right, the early conflicts.
The early believers were a massive underdog, like unimaginably outgunned. They were a tiny, lightly armed, structurally disjointed militia.
Facing down massive, heavily armored professional armies. armies trained in Byzantine or Sassanid military tactics.
Right. So if a small, under-equipped force lines up in a traditional field-to-field engagement against a superior army and attempts to win through just brute force attrition, what happens?
They will be eradicated. It is simple military mathematics.
Exactly. Therefore, a small force requires an asymmetrical doctrine just to survive.
They cannot win the contest of muscle.
No. They have to win the contest of information and infrastructure. They have to dismantle the enemy's command and control.
And that is exactly what Dr. Khaled Waleed has uncovered in the text.
This is the mind-blowing part.
He strips away the imagery of chopping off heads, and he reveals a highly advanced, modern tactical manual for asymmetric warfare.
The source material credits 3 major military discoveries entirely to Dr. Waleed, and we need to dissect each one to understand how this doctrine actually functions operationally.
Let's do it.
Okay, opening Dr. Khaled Waleed's military playbook. Tactic number 1. This comes from Muhammad, verse 4. The command historically translated as striking the necks, darb ar-rikab. Now, if we're abandoning the literal flesh and blood neck, what exactly is a 7th century militia being ordered to strike here?
Okay, so Dr. Waleed defines rikab in a military context as the enemy's forward reconnaissance, their surveillance operations, and their early warning communication networks.
So the vanguard, the scouts.
Yes. Remember, rikab connects back to monitoring and oversight. Therefore, striking the rikab means systematically neutralizing the eyes and ears of the advancing army.
You target their forward observers.
Exactly. You intercept their scouts, you extinguish their signal fires, you blind them.
I really want to map this onto a modern analogy to show just how conceptually advanced this reading is. In modern warfare, before a single tank rolls out or an infantry battalion even engages, the first phase of the operation is always an electronic warfare campaign.
Right.
It's a cyber attack. You use packet flooding to take down their communication servers. You launch anti-radiation missiles to destroy their radar arrays. You jam their radio frequencies. Why? Because if you blind the sensors, the main body of the enemy army cannot perceive the battlefield.
And what happens to an army that cannot perceive the battlefield?
Gatehouse.
It loses cohesion completely. Dr. Waleed points out that the primary goal of darb ar-rikab is not mass casualties.
It's not about killing everyone.
No, the goal is fragmentation. An army is only powerful when it moves as a unified organism. If you sever its sensory inputs, it becomes scattered, disoriented, and deeply paranoid.
And the source text includes a crucial corollary here that I think really proves this isn't about slaughter.
Yes, the part about capturing.
Exactly. It explicitly states that once the enemy forces are blinded, fragmented, and tightened upon, they can be captured. The ultimate purpose of this tactic is to force a surrender or neutralization with minimal bloodshed. It allows for the later release or ransom of prisoners of war.
It is a doctrine of containment, not extermination.
Exactly. It is a surgical strategy designed to end the threat posed by a superior force quickly and efficiently, completely bypassing the meat grinder of a war of attrition.
And this is but blinding the vanguard is only phase 1.
Right. Because if you take out the scouts, you still have the massive main body of the heavy infantry to deal with.
Which brings us to tactic number 2.
Tactic number 2. This is from Al-Anfal, verse 12. The phrase is, striking above the anak. Darb faka al-anak.
Right. And the phrase literally translates to above the necks.
Above the necks, okay.
So under Dr. Waleed's framework, if the neck is the forward monitoring system, what sits above that in the hierarchy of control?
Well, the brain, the central nervous system.
Precisely. Dr. Waleed translates above the necks as the absolute highest echelon of command and control.
The headquarters.
The generals. The strategic nerve center of the military apparatus.
Oh, man. So this is the decapitation strike.
It is. But again, to be painfully clear,
we are not talking about taking a sword to a literal general's throat.
No. We're talking about severing the transmission of authority. We are talking about taking the command tent offline.
The structural logic here is just flawless. Because if Tactic 1 striking the rikab is blinding the organism, then Tactic 2 striking above the anaki is severing the spinal cord.
And think about the math here. How does a small, weak force neutralize 10,000 heavy infantrymen?
By recognizing that an army without leadership is just a heavily armed, highly anxious crowd?
Yes. If the command structure is neutralized, if the signal flags aren't waving, if the runners aren't delivering orders, the rank and file troops don't know whether to advance or hold the line or retreat.
Their numerical superiority actually becomes a liability.
It just adds to the chaos. They are paralyzed by a vacuum of authority.
And a disorganized, leaderless mass is highly vulnerable to a small, agile, coordinated unit. It's brilliant. You blind them, then you sever their brain. But there is one final piece to this architecture of asymmetric survival.
Tactic number 3.
Tactic number 3, also derived from Al-Anfal, verse 12, striking every banan.
Now, historically, banan has been translated as fingertips, or occasionally joints.
Which, again, you can imagine the grotesque, primitive interpretations this spawned over the centuries.
Oh, absolutely. Literal commands to systematically chop the fingers off enemy soldiers so they can't grip their weapons.
Which is the very definition of medieval savagery.
It is. But Dr. Waleed applies the exact same linguistic and strategic lens to banan.
Okay, so if we are dismantling an army as a system of infrastructure, what are the joints or the fingertips of a massive military operation?
They are the logistical nodes.
The logistic.
The connective tissue that allows the massive body to move and sustain itself. We're talking about the supply lines, the remount stations, the bridges, the critical crossroads. Exactly. Dr. Waleed discovers that striking the banan means targeting the pivotal logistical infrastructure. Because an army travels on its stomach, and it requires constant reinforcement.
Right. So if you destroy a bridge behind an advancing army, you haven't killed a single soldier.
Right.
But you have fundamentally altered their tactical reality.
They can no longer retreat, and they can no longer be resupplied.
You have paralyzed their mobility.
Yes.
Okay, let's synthesize all 3 of these tactics. Because when viewed together, Dr. Khaled Waleed has reconstructed a stunningly cohesive modern doctrine of asymmetric warfare for an outgunned force.
It really is a masterclass.
Phase 1. You strike the recab, you target their reconnaissance and early warning systems, you blind their sensors so they cannot perceive your movement.
We're blinding the enemy.
Phase 2. You strike above the Anik. You launch a decapitation strike against their headquarters and command centers. You sever the brain from the body so no coherent orders can be issued.
Severing the authority.
Phase 3. You strike the banan. You destroy their logistical joints, the bridges, the supply lines, the transport hubs. You root them to the physical environment so they cannot maneuver or retreat.
They cannot see, they cannot coordinate, and they cannot move.
A massive imperial army is entirely neutralized by a small, agile force using surgical strikes against infrastructure.
It is a masterpiece of strategic efficiency.
It totally transforms a text that critics have pointed to for centuries as evidence of archaic bloodthirstiness.
Completely turns it on its head.
It turns it into a highly sophisticated, rational, and profoundly structural manual for surviving an existential threat against impossible odds.
And this underscores the immense world-building power of Dr. Khaled Waleed's research.
It really does.
By engaging in rigorous diachronic linguistics, by peeling back the layers of semantic narrowing and medieval projection, he hasn't just offered a polite new translation.
No, he's recovered an entire lost philosophy of systems theory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By understanding the root RQB as a matrix of control rather than a simple piece of anatomy, the entire landscape of the ancient text radically shifts.
It completely reorients our relationship to the material. I mean, as we pull back and look at the massive journey we've taken today, based on this single source document, the scope is actually staggering.
It covers so much ground.
We started by dissecting a single 3-letter root word. And we watched how understanding its structural logic transformed the narrative of Moses.
Right.
It went from a story of a panicking victim into a masterclass in hypervigilant situational awareness within a hostile surveillance state.
The odial loop.
Exactly. And then we saw how it expanded the historical, localized command of freeing a slave into a timeless universal mandate. A mandate to dismantle any architecture of control, whether that is predatory debt, economic disenfranchisement, or systemic oppression, that humiliatingly binds the human neck.
So powerful.
And from there, we traced that matrix of control all the way up the cosmic ladder, analyzing the angelic networks of divine administration, and finally arriving at the supreme monitor.
Areki alalala.
A realization that completely dismantles the psychological power of human tyranny by proving that every oppressor is ultimately subject to a higher node of absolute control.
Making the tyrant's power an illusion.
Yes. And finally, we saw how this linguistic key unlocks a completely rational, advanced 3-step military doctrine. One that replaces the myth of ancient savagery with surgical asymmetric strategy.
The text just transforms.
It goes from a disjointed collection of seemingly violent and spiritual verses into a beautifully unified, logically flawless thesis about power, freedom, vulnerability, and ultimate survival.
It serves as a profound reminder of the responsibility we have when interpreting the past.
Mm-hmm.
Misunderstanding the mechanics of a single word can plunge an entire philosophy into darkness for a millennium. True understanding requires us to relentlessly question inherited assumptions, to look past the surface translations, and to uncover the structural, architectural logic beneath the words.
Well said. We've covered an immense amount of ground today, moving from ancient Arabic morphology all the way to the mechanics of modern cyber warfare.
It's been a wild ride.
But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought, something to process long after this deep dive ends.
Leave them with something to chew on.
We've spent the last hour exploring Dr. Khaled Waleed's revelation that a neck is actually a center of control, a critical vulnerability. We've learned that true liberation means identifying and striking those nodes to dismantle systems of coercion.
Right.
So I want you to look at the architecture of your own life today. Step back and analyze the board you're operating on. What modern nodes of control are currently holding your neck?
Good question.
Is it the algorithmic architecture of your devices that constantly monitors and monetizes your attention?
The digital panopticon.
Exactly. Or is it a predatory financial system that keeps you endlessly sprinting on a treadmill of debt, completely stripping your agency?
Binding your economic neck.
Or maybe it is a toxic professional environment that dictates your self-worth and paralyzes your mobility. These systems rely on you believing that their power is absolute.
They want you to panic.
They rely on you panicking, breaking your OD loop, and surrendering your situational awareness.
Mm-hmm.
But now that you know the structural mechanics of how control operates, what is your strategy to strike those nodes?
How do you fight back?
How are you going to reclaim your vantage point, blind the systems that maliciously monitor you, and win back your own profound independence?
The knowledge is there.
The blueprint for your liberation has been there for centuries. You just needed to know how to read the ancient roots.